for those of you who don't know Peter's history, he was, and so he still is a journalist who went to all of the world's most dangerous places. It was in Kosovo and Afghanistan and Rwanda, I think, and then decided to visit an even more dangerous place, a film set, Hollywood. Yes.
You're not kidding.
No, I was going to say,
at least in Afghanistan, you know who the bad guys are.
Exactly. I was going to say which is more threatening.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear the story of how this film came about. Because you wrote the script very recently.
It's the strangest story. Oh, that's very loud. I had made a couple years ago a little film called Parkland that Ridley Scott had seen and admired, liked, and called me and said he had optioned the rights to an article about Bennett Amalu that came out in GQ. And I read the story. I'd actually known about Bennett, and it's a confluence of almost irresistible forces. I met Ridley on New Year's Eve, 2013. Right. A couple weeks later, went into Sony. A couple weeks after that, I began the screenplay. And I've been doing these Q&As with Will Smith, and when people's phone rings, he has the most fucking charismatic stuff to say because he's so much funnier. I have nothing elegant to say. And I started writing the screenplay, and there's such an urgency to this story, and Bennett was someone I really understood very deeply. And wrote the screenplay in, I've never done this because I'm a slow writer, in 3 months. And, delivered to Sony, delivered to Ridley, who delivered to Will, and within 5 months of my first meeting with Ridley, we had a greenlit movie. And 2 months after that, we were on set in Pittsburgh. So the entire process of going from blank page to finished movie in a can was less than a year.
Yeah, that never happens
now.
No,
it's absurd. And it's testament to the fact that I think the story and the subject matter has such urgency, and it's such a now story. And we all felt we had wind in our sails, me, Will, the studio, Ridley. It was just all pushed along.
Because there's still denial. I mean, it's not like a battle that's necessarily been won here.
It's, I think the equivalent would be if the disease were AIDS, we're in 1994. We're overwhelmed with observation and empirical evidence all around us. We're confused. There's no hope of a cure yet. People around us are dropping like flies, people we know, and we just don't quite understand. We're a little underwater. So that's where we are. There's a lot of denial. The National Football League really wishes this would just go away, but now understands it can't. And I don't think they really understand what to do about it, to be honest.
I was going to ask you, because the legal department of a studio once said to me, things can be printed in a magazine and where they won't sue, but if it's a movie, they will. And I was wondering what kind of how difficult this was to get this to screen legally.
Well, the good news is I was a journalist for a very long time and was very adept and comfortable with the fact-checking process. I loved it because it made me better. It made me honest, because I lie all the time. and I get myself in trouble. In fact, when I was writing, I wrote for the New York Times Magazine for many years, and the fact checkers, by the time I was done with an article, the fact checkers and I were no longer on speaking terms.
So you thought, movies, that's better.
But Sony also has this reputation of making terrific, urgent nonfiction movies. Captain Phillips, Zero Dark 30 most recently, Social Network. So I went to them and I said, even as we began the writing process, I want to bring in an objective fact checker from the beginning to follow me in the writing, just to plow behind me, make sure we were good. And then the other thing that was significant is in this movie, there's a tremendous amount of real footage.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that, about how much, it's blended very cleverly, actually, the mix of archive.
I really wanted this movie to embrace the game and not just be a downer. I wanted to show how beautiful the game really is. I love football. I played it, myself. It's graceful. It's powerful. I love athletes. And I wanted the movie to embody and embrace the conflict. That's something so beautiful and important, and something so much a tapestry of the American culture. We think of Thanksgiving, and now we think of cowboys and lions on Christmas Day, and we think of, eating turkey, Thanksgiving turkey, watching the football game, and on Sundays, houses all around America filled with the sounds of NFL football. And it was, I love all that. It's very much America to me. And so I wanted to make that part of the story and not just be about an outsider who wanted to shit all over it. It's not all what it was about to me.
I thought one of my favorite moments is, I can't remember the character's name, the doctor who said, that there are 20 million people craving this, and what it means to America, what it means to this town, which is a sort of the kind of debate or dilemma that goes on, right now with oil companies or with, anything that's an engine of this country, yes, which is also doing people harm. So I thought you got it. Was that also what you wanted?
Well, in the writing and also in the directing, I wanted to make a very clear distinction between the game and the players, with whom I have great compassion, and the National Football League, which is a corporate institution on the level of Exxon and Mobil and BP and Apple and Volkswagen. We all know how Volkswagen's gone recently. The National Football League is about one thing only, is the bottom line. So I make a very strong distinction, and I wanted to portray and cast and direct actors as players to try and bring that pain to life. In fact, Justin Strelzik, who died in that fiery crash, that footage is actually the dash cam footage of the actual accident. And I really fought to have that in the movie. I wanted to give a sense of just how crazy this disease makes these players. That, they murder each other, they murder their families. There's a professional wrestler who was one of the first ones diagnosed. He murdered his entire family, his wife, his children, then killed himself. And so you hear the corporate desire of denial, and then you get inside the lives of these people who are affected, and it really makes you angry.
Yeah. You've done a number of David and Goliath. You love the David and Goliath story. Peter wrote Kill the Messenger about the journalist Gary Webb, who was destroyed, in fact, by his tragically committed suicide when the sort of establishment turned on him. You said that you identified with Will Smith's character. Can you talk a bit about that, about how you feel?
I have this pet theory that writers only have one story to tell. And they dress it up differently, different time periods, different characters, different geographies, but basically they tell the same narrative over and over and over again. And, my narrative is man against the system, David versus Goliath. And I don't know if that narrative chose me or I chose it. All I know is, in fact, my next film is called Felt, about Mark Felt, who is Deep Throat in Watergate. I mean, the quintessential, the first whistleblower. And I promise that's going to be my last, because I'm out of things to say about them.
You don't say that.
And so I just love that narrative, but there's also something quintessentially American about that narrative. That in this country, unlike almost any other country on the planet, one person can actually make a difference. And, this example is mind-numbing. African, Nigerian, a Christian speaks to the dead, doesn't know what football is, doesn't even know what a center is, hates Pittsburgh, they hate him, and then suddenly is given the gift, the dangerous gift, of being infused with this necessity to tell America the deepest truth about one of its most sacrosanct institutions. I couldn't have made that up. And to me, that irony is behind why this movie just came together so quickly. As a reader, as a moviegoer, as a former novelist, I've never seen a narrative that came so clearly packaged.
Because I was going to ask you, anybody who's done films based on real life sources know it's quite difficult to get the messiness of real life into a dramatic structure. So and sometimes things have to be sacrificed or altered. How much had to be changed to make it fit into to our movie?
I mean, nothing and everything. Life is not narrative. Life doesn't have any architecture to it. Life is a mess. And it's, one anarchic event after the other. And, they accumulate, and then retroactively we assign some kind of shape and design to them, and we say, well, that was our life. And so that's the story of our life. So in that sense, I come to a movie like this with just a pile of information, ones and zeros of human experience. And I sit and stare at it at a wall. I work with large Post-its. And and on these Post-its, I write hundreds and hundreds of beats and moments in a person's life or a person's story. I stick it on a wall, and they're color-coded, and I spend weeks sort of designing, and they almost look like a Chuck Close painting, you know? And then eventually, if I'm lucky, a design appears and a shape. And for me, I couldn't figure out the shape of this movie until I figured out where the movie ended, because we're actually dealing with a thing that's an ongoing problem.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, what was it? Which bit was it that came together for you?
The suicide of Dave Duerson.
Did that really happen? Is that based on
yeah, no, it's a terrible story. You know, Dave Duerson. I don't know how many football fans there are out here, but Dave Duerson was he played in those Chicago Bears teams that were just killing it in the 80s, you know. Remember the Fridge, Jim McMahon. And he was a brutal craftsman of violence. I mean, he just used his body as a weapon. And but he was revered and worshipped, and eventually made the Hall of Fame. And when he retired, he put on a suit and joined the NFL Players Association and became head of the Disability Committee. And he was known as Dr. No, because as much of a motherfucker as he was on the field, he was that much in the office, and he denied every single claim for disability that came his way. Oh my God. And ironically, including the one of Andre Waters, who would commit suicide after that confrontation they had in the film. And then, so the irony that he then not only comes down with this disease, probably was infused by it for years, which is why he was so hard, and then had this presence of mind to write a note saying, I know there's something wrong with my mind. I know I'm wrong. I'm going to kill myself, but I'm going to leave my brain to science, because you've got to find out what's going on. And he left that note, and he left the pictures, just as I had in the film. So to me, that death it's Hamlet, it's suicide. It's Shakespearean, you know. Yeah. And so I felt that there was nothing more powerful to end on than that moment, and then the denouement, where Bennett is offered the job in Washington.
Right. And when did that happen, actually? That
2012.
Okay. Oh, so it was very recent. It was just before.
This is living history. No, this stuff. Yeah. I mean, as I was making the movie and shooting the movie in Pittsburgh, I was constantly getting updates, and families of players were coming in to give me more stories. I mean, I had to stop listening at some point because it just became overwhelming.
And in terms of directing Will Smith and getting that performance, did he, obviously every actor kind of makes the part his own, but how close was he to you must have met him, you've met him, right?
Bennett.
Yeah, you've met him.
Oh my God, yeah. I spent
times.
Lots of time with him.
And so how close is he?
You know, it's an interesting question. As a director, I give my casts a really strong directive. And that is, I'm not at all interested in impersonation. I'm not at all interested in them aping some kind of characteristic, or, you know, copying someone's mannerisms or language or speech or even accent, you know. Because there's a strong difference for me between impersonation and performance. Performance is an emotional delivery. Impersonation is a gag. It's a trick. So Alec Baldwin and Albert Brooks had no interest in meeting the people they played. Will, because he's so infectiously powerful as a charismatic creature, has no worry about being infected. He's in control of every ounce of his being. And he's just an incredibly professional human being, and he spent quite a lot of time. In fact, I took Will to his very first autopsy. And we went to 2 autopsies that Bennett performed, and then eventually went to about 10 in total. And the only thing I wanted Will to do was watch how Bennett used his hand, because Will clearly is not adept at cutting up human bodies. It's the one thing he doesn't do.
But he could if he tried.
He certainly could, yeah. And I just wanted him to watch the choreography of the hands and the feet around that table. How do you actually move when you're taking apart a human body? That was the only thing I wanted Will to watch. The accent we worked on for about 3 months with a dialect coach, really dialing in and out like a radio, syllable by syllable. Real Bennett Amalu, his accent is so strange and charismatic, it'd be hard to listen to for 2 hours. Mm. But Will, I wanted it to be like music. Mm. And I thought he achieved something beautiful.
Tell me about those autopsy sessions. So that's serious research. So how many you did?
I went to about 10. And I went to all sorts of autopsies. I went to most autopsy chambers are like butcher shops. It's pretty terrible. Saws, big saws, lots of electrical equipment, a lot of blood. And Bennett's table is completely pristine. It's like he's working with putting together model trains. And he's just an artist at everything he does. Even in the film, his instruments are completely different than, other ones, they use axe-like things, and sorry to get graphic, but when they open the skull, they literally take a chisel and a hammer as though they're opening up a piece of wood, and they just start whacking away just at your skull until they can get in a wedge and they cleave it open, and then you hear this crack in your skull, and there's your brain. Bennett, it's like he's just an artist, just like a scalpel like this. It's very careful.
And in fact, the way you've shot those sequences, it is as if it's an art, because it's very focused on the kind of beautiful details.
Well, I wanted to give a sense of being almost in Bennetts Church, and I wanted to shoot it very impressionistically and beautifully because I'm trying to neutralize what's obviously something difficult, which is to face our own mortality. It's amazing if you look at the disassembly of a human body is incredible because you take apart a body and you lay it on the table and in the various containers, everything that makes a human being is there. The liver, the heart, you open the brain, everything is there except the one thing that makes you a human being, which is some mystical thing that no one can put their finger on, which is why Bennett was so fascinating, because as a real Christian, he took it upon himself as his mission to usher people from life to death by solving the riddle of their death, by telling their own story. And I found that this is exquisite. So to me, his autopsy chamber was like a church.
And that came out in your conversations with him, that you realized that he had this kind of mystic almost.
Oh yes, he's very open about it. It's why people can't stand him.
And that was true. That they didn't.
They hate him because he's so pure. He's such a unbelievably divine individual. It's like it sounds hyperbolic, but he's almost too good.
There was a nice moment, I thought it was very well done, where you have, when you first see him go into the autopsy room, and there's a birthday party going on behind, and you never go into close, it's just in the background, but you see he wasn't invited to the birthday party. Obviously nobody, it was a nice, just a subtle way of establishing that he's not popular. But I'm sure that there's some people want to ask a few questions, so.
Yeah. That's the one thing about Cyril that I disagree with. We have screaming matches about that because he's oddly enough, as practical as Cyril is, when it comes to JFK, he's one of these loony conspiracy theorists.
So who does he think? Who does he blame?
The guy with the umbrella and the shadows and the grassy knoll and the magic bullet that turns left and right. I mean, he's like Oliver Stone. He's a whack job when it comes to this. Yeah. And I like Oliver, but not about that. He came to set every day. He sat with me in the editing room. I have no idea. I'm sure he felt aggressive at his breakfast table, but I had no communication with the NFL at all. Sony was incredibly protective and aggressive about protecting me as a filmmaker and said, you do whatever you want and we got your back. So I never approached them for permission. We never licensed anything. We just did it and used it and said, we'll see what happens, I'm sure Goodell would like to have had some influence, but I have no idea what he thought. But I'll find out after Christmas Day and I'll let you know. Yeah, let's talk about David Morse for a second.
Yes,
that's just one of the great performances, yeah.
Yes. And actually, and just in his eyes, in the very first thing he does, and you see in his eyes that there's something wrong. It's an amazing performance.
Yeah, David, I originally cast somebody else in that role, and thank God it didn't happen. I cast an actor, and he was double booked, and I threw a fit. My wife's sitting here, and I got so angry. I was running around the house just fucking pissed that some agent had screwed me by double booking my actor. And then David was actually cast in the Mike O'Malley role, the sort of bigoted assistant. That was originally going to be David's role. Because I love Dave. I just wanted him in the movie. I could cast him as the wife, if anything, because he's so good. And then I moved him over, and I realized, fuck.
Perfect. Yes.
I mean, the movie gods. And So I asked him first to go memorize that Hall of Fame speech that is in the title sequence. I had no idea how I was going to use it. I just know I needed it. And it was the first thing I ever shot in the movie, and David walks onto set, and we're shooting in Pittsburgh, where Mike Webster is a god, worshipped. And David, you know, I had my makeup department create a prosthetic for his forehead and his hands, so he walked on and said he looked exactly like Webster. And David is like this giant dark angel as a human being. And he stepped onto set, and, you know, movie sets, as you all know, are like construction sites. They're the most unglamorous, loud, hammers, dirty people. And everybody stopped what they were doing, put their tools down, and went quiet and just looked at him. And it was like God was walking through us. And it never stopped like that. His performance, you know, when that scene, that incredibly powerful scene with Alec, where he grabs his head and in pain, like, I just need this pain to stop. You know, I wrote that scene, and we were shooting, and it was good, and it was powerful, and Alec was fine. Alec has a really bad back, and he was tired, and David walked up to me and said, you know, I want to do something. Could I just go off book? And I said, you could do whatever you want, just don't tell Alec. And he went and he grabbed Alec. And if you watch closely, like, Alec is fucking terrified because David is 6'4", and he grabbed his head. And Alec, I knew, had a bad back, so I felt a little bad about that. So you could see the pain running down his spine. But David was all in. He was really amazing.
No, it's incredible. It was really sad when he dies. Like, oh no, that's it. We ww't see him.
Terrible.
Except that,
You know, I can't exactly tell you how I got access to those clips. But you know, the concept is just fair use. It's a constitutional element. It's about First Amendment. And essentially it's a defense, so that if the NFL, for instance, would display some sign of unhappiness, you know, well, it's, you know, we're protected by fair use because it's a nonfiction story, for starters, and a public advocacy issue. And they would have to prove that we were using the footage to malign them. Ironically, all the clips I used, well, except for the concussive hits, but there's a lot of beautiful football in this movie. And so I did that purposely, both to protect myself, but also because I wanted to show love of the game. So I felt like we were completely covered, and we are. Well, that's a leading question. You know, look, it's a feature film. It's not a documentary, and it's not a Wikipedia entry. People go to movies to feel, you know. There isn't I mean, All the President's Men, 80% of that movie is fiction. The good news about this film is, because I knew we were going to face this and the NFL, and it's an ongoing issue, we were really careful. In terms of that, they were followed, they were harassed. She was pregnant. Between the stress of the job, Bennett being exiled, building this home, building their dream home that they had to abandon as they were ready to move in, the power of that, you know, triggered this really terrible miscarriage, a very late-term miscarriage. All that's real. And so, yeah, all that was true. It was actually much worse than that. I mean, just for instance, in the original drafts of the script, this had happened. You know, Bennett's 4 tires were frequently punctured. He saw people messing with his car. He was concerned about brakes. I'm not saying the NFL were hiring, you know, the Sopranos to come after him. But what was happening was, this was Pittsburgh, and football is a religion there, and the Steelers are their gods, and people were really fucking pissed because the stuff was coming out, what he was trying to do, and they didn't want anybody messing with their football.
It's kind of a miracle that he actually, you know, prevailed in some ways.
You know, his vindication on the back of this movie is one of the most delicious things. You know, I visited his autopsy chamber in Lodi. You know, Pittsburgh, you know, 4 slabs and a lot of people and bodies. It was a city, and he had resources. Where he works now is a single slab, basically in a double-wide trailer, in migrant farm territory. And most of the people who end up on his table are migrant Mexican farm workers. It's real humble pie. And he loves what he does every day.
And is that why he turned down the job in Washington?
He wasn't needed in Washington.
Oh.
He was needed back home doing his work. He's also, I think he's smart enough to know that he's not a political creature. and would have a hard time surviving that exposure.
And it was a way to neutralize him as well, as people always promote you to neutralize. Yeah.
I mean, it's why I ended the movie the way I ended it, with him going to a high school field and watching the players. A couple of things. I mean, a fact is Pop Warner football is down 35% this year. What that means is that parents are getting hip to this, and kids are the elite athletes are no longer playing football. It's going to change the complexion of the game, the professional game, the college game very, very soon. My biggest fear is about children playing because, I mean, I'm not telling you anything you can't figure out. Undeveloped brains, undeveloped skulls, these hits are, the G-force, as it says in the movie, can, create concussions very low levels. When I was researching the movie in Pittsburgh, and I was in Pittsburgh and I was shooting, I was looking, there was some football that I shot. And I was looking for a high school team to kind of be background players. I was going to hire professionals to be ringers, to do the bigger hits. But I wanted a high school team in the background, and I went to a high school game on a Friday night lights. In Pennsylvania is huge, like Texas. And I was watching this team, and I was on the sidelines. And these were the two top teams in Pennsylvania. They were unbelievable. They were like college-level teams. And I found myself, and here's the contradiction. I was on the sideline. I got wrapped up in the game. I found myself really getting immersed in the glory of the game and these young athletes and these bodies and these hits and masculinity and the club, like the carryover from childhood to manhood that you're watching in these teams, between these teams. And then I remembered why I was there and the movie I was making, and I was kind of disgusted with myself. So it's a very complicated, difficult ordeal. And instead of being simplistic about it, I wanted to end the movie with embracing the contradiction of that. And so we're watching, if you remember with these shots in football, I had my crew run around and grab me a lot of B-roll of, I just shoot those kids just sitting there enjoying themselves in the sun, and they're leaning on their helmets, and I want Americana. I want as if Rockwell was painting this field of football, young football players. And then I designed that play with the two head-on collisions, and I wanted to end on a feeling of melancholy, triumph, Bennett's vindication, the mission's not done, and isn't this kind of beautiful to watch all at once? And I think life's like that, to be honest. I think life is all those things. And so I didn't want to leave with any simple sense of, get out of jail free on this one. Yeah, just watch what happens in the next few months. And I think the release of this movie is going to accelerate the conversation.
I was going to ask, actually, about the release of the movie and what Sony are planning to do, both with, kids seeing it, with college football towns, that kind of thing, of how they're planning to publicize it.
I mean, 3,500 screens. I mean, they're really going long and wide. They are really, they're all in on this, and the studio's just been terrific creative partners and now business partners. I couldn't be happier. It's a really good question. We don't know. I think NFL football has become the biggest industrial spectacle, I think, in the history of man, and that sounds like a exaggeration, but I think it's not. I think that, 20 million more people watch every Sunday, 1 billion people watch the Super Bowl, add in the commercials, the car industry, Frito-Lay, all the chips they sell. It's like its own country, professional football. So you take something that size, and then off on the horizon is a little iceberg, and it's they're about to collide. I don't think we know what's going to happen, but here's my guess, is the best approximation I can make is when I was growing up, I could tell you the name of every champion in every weight class in boxing. Today, I don't think I could tell you one. I think football 15 years from now will have gone the way of boxing. I think it'll exist. I think it'll still make a lot of money. I think a lot of people will still watch it. It's just, it won't occupy this wide stripe, in the tapestry of American culture. Now, I might be completely wrong, but I don't think we really know, but that's my guess.
And what will replace it?
What's that?
No, sorry.
I don't know what's going to replace it. I I don't think we really know. Maybe
soccer, but the boxing analogy is a very good one. But I think it will have a huge impact, your film, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me. Have a good night.